Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys, I am excited to bring you this show today. But before I get into any of the content, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you find yourself tuning into my podcast often and you actually find my information helpful, it's very important to me that you hit that subscribe button below. It's going to help my channel grow, and I do need my channel to grow if I'm going to continue to release content. So I appreciate you all tuning in so far, but make sure to hit that subscribe button and do hit the like button on the video. These things are essential for me growing my channel. So if you like my content and you think that I help you in fantasy football, please make sure to do these things to help me as well. So I'm going to start right here with the first thing on my list, and that is the first part of round one that I really want to talk about, and that is to take wide receivers that are going to average 10-plus targets a game, or at least close to 10 targets a game. Guys like Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, we all know who they are. All the consensus first-round wide receivers are going to fit this category. Just make sure that, you don't do anything fancy like try to draft Garrett Wilson at the end of round one or anything like that, because he's not guaranteed to get 10 or more targets a game. You want an absolute guarantee of your wide receivers that you drafted in round one averaging close to 10 targets a game, or 10 targets a game, or more than 10 targets a game. This is critically important. And it's more and more of a passing league now, so there's actually a good amount of wide receivers that fit this category. Also, when it comes to your running backs, guys, make sure that they're going to be running backs that are going to be getting 18-plus carries a game and 5 or more targets out of the backfield. Like I said, it's more and more of a passing league now. This is not only with wide receivers, though. Running backs are receiving more and more targets out of the backfield because teams are throwing just more passes in general. Right. So, you want to make sure that they fit these categories. Right. And so that's one of the most important first parts of round one. Moving on to my second thing in round one. And this is something that not nearly enough fantasy influencers talk about. And that is, you want to use your first pick to plan how you're going to construct the rest of your team. Let me give you an example. There's a lot of people that say to just pick the best player possible at every spot in the draft and always go best player available. Well, it makes sense when you first think about that, but when you really take a deeper dive, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Let me give you guys an example. Say you take Christian McCaffrey with the 106. He somehow slips to you at the 106, and he is the best player available. Okay, I can see you wanting to take Christian McCaffrey right there, but think about this. When you come back around to the 204, the best players available at that point by far and away are going to be Kenneth Walker, Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard. These super elite running backs that are going in round two are going to be the best options available at that time because all the tier one wide receivers are already going to be off the board. CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and then all the super high Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson wide receivers, they're all going to be gone, right? So you're now going to be starting your team with two running backs if you're going best player available at each pick, instead of planning how you're going to construct your entire roster. And so that's kind of the problem with that thinking is if you go best player available at every pick, well, sometimes you end up going too heavy on the running back button early or too heavy on the wide receiver button before you start drafting running backs. It's not really about drafting the best player available. It's about drafting the best player available for how your roster is currently constructed based on the picks you've already made and how you're going to construct the rest of your draft. So in PPR leagues, you do not want to end up in a situation where you neglect wide receiver in your first and your second pick. So it's not always about going best player available. It's about using the pick that you're currently on to plan how you're going to construct the rest of your roster and basing your pick on that. Next thing on my list is don't base everything on what you saw last year. Now, obviously, a lot of the consensus first-round picks are people that were absolutely awesome last season. And, that's just kind of how it always is. And it's a little bit silly because fantasy changes every year. But, looking at the consensus first-round picks this year, I think they're all pretty accurate. But keep in mind that 30 to 40% of the time, consensus first-round picks bust. If you look at the 2021 season, more than 50% of the consensus first-round picks busted. Last year, not quite that many, but there were still definitely some busts in the first round, especially the 101, Jonathan Taylor. The consensus 101 was a huge bust last season. But what I'm saying is don't base who you pick this year on that. For example, I'm not afraid to take Jonathan Taylor in the first round this year as long as I plan on taking a wide receiver in the second round, okay? Because, look, this guy had 20 touches per game last year. He, that was top 4 Yeah, top 4 overall in the NFL as far as overall touches. So he should have had a way better fantasy season considering the ridiculous opportunity share he was still getting. And, the fact that he's immensely talented, one of the most talented running backs in this game. So I'm not afraid to draft Jonathan Taylor this year. I think that he's going to have a massive bounce back season. The volume's going to be there. The opportunity is going to be there. And we know that he's in for some serious positive touchdown regression because he only got in the end zone 4 times last year. Couple that with the fact that, he was injured, so he was hobbled, for at least one quarter of the season. So that affected his fantasy outlook as well. Look for JT to have a huge bounce back. Moral of the story is what happened last year is last year, and focus on what's going to happen this year. Don't just copy and paste. Next, moving on to round 2, is I want you guys, and this is something I've been stressing a lot this offseason, but please fade drafting quarterbacks in round 2. Do not draft Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen in round 2. Your league mates are going to be doing it, but that doesn't mean that you should fall into that trap. Wait at least a little bit later on quarterbacks. Wait for guys like Justin Fields, Deshaun Watson, Justin Herbert, guys like that. Even, if you wanted to draft like Jalen Hurts or Joe Burrow, you could at least wait till round 3 or 4 to get those guys instead of wasting one of your first 2 picks on a quarterback, which you should absolutely never do, no matter how high of a ceiling quarterbacks have nowadays. It's still more important to draft a running back and a wide receiver in your first 2 rounds. And also in round 2, make sure that if you took a running back in round 1, please, you absolutely have to take a wide receiver in round 2. You just have to. You do not want to start your first 2 picks in a PPR league without drafting a wide receiver. One of your first 2 picks or both of your first 2 picks, nowadays with the way fantasy football works and the increased target share for wide receivers, either one of your first 2 picks or both of your first 2 picks need to be a wide receiver because the wide receiver position is just far and away more valuable than it's ever been. And with the increased target share, wide receivers, in my opinion, are at least slightly more valuable than running backs now. So do not neglect the wide receiver position in the first 2 rounds. Make sure that at least one of your first 2 picks is a wide receiver. And then moving on to the last thing on my list on round 2 is I have a few players I really want you to avoid that are pretty often going in round 2. And that is Najee Harris, Dalvin Cook, T. Higgins, and, of course, Josh Allen or Pat Mahomes. Now, when it comes to Najee Harris, I'm just not sold. This dude has not averaged more than 4 yards per carry in each of his first 2 seasons. He has no efficiency because he has no speed. He doesn't have top-end speed. He has no big playability. The biggest play in his career so far has been a 37-yard run. I mean, come on. The biggest play in his career in 2 full seasons in the NFL is a 37-yard run. This guy has 0 big playability. Okay? Dalvin Cook is a little bit older. He's way over the carry count that you want for a running back that you expect elite fantasy production from. Plus, not to mention, the entire offense now runs through Justin Jefferson, not Dalvin Cook. So make sure to avoid Dalvin Cook in round 2 and also avoid T. Higgins. I like T. Higgins, but he's just a little bit too high as far as where he's being taken in the draft. There's just way better receivers on the board at this point, guys like Garrett Wilson, that are going to be the wide receiver 1 in their offense rather than drafting somebody who's not even going to be the number 1 wide receiver in their offense. I don't like T. Higgins being taken in round 2. And of course, I have a few others on here that I don't want to tell you to just completely avoid because their ceilings are so ridiculously high. But I want you to at least be a little bit cautious when drafting them. And that is Derrick Henry and Breece Hall. Okay. Derrick Henry is so old. He has 750 career carries. He's 29 years old. He's way older than you want a running back to be that you're drafting in one of the first 2 rounds now. He has the ceiling, because he's Derrick Henry, to be the number 1 running back in all of fantasy. So I don't want to sit here and just tell you absolutely fade Derrick Henry no matter what, because he's still draftable because of his ridiculous talent level and his ridiculous ceiling. But I want you to at least understand the fact that, one of these times in the very near future, Derrick Henry is going to come out and he's just going to look like a used up running back because he just has so much tread on the tires. And that could be this season. So at least keep that in mind. And then the other one here is Breece Hall. I want you guys to be very cautious when drafting Breece Hall. Again, this is another guy who has so much talent and such a great role in his offense that he could be the number 1 running back in all of fantasy. So due to that ridiculously high ceiling, I don't want to tell you to just absolutely and utterly fade Breece Hall. But he is coming back from a major ACL injury, and we know based on a long history of fantasy football that players are almost never 100% when coming back from this injury. So Breece Hall has a really good chance to come out this year this next year and just not really look like the 100% Breece Hall that we saw before he went down with his injury. And if he's afraid to make jump cuts and really use his explosiveness and athleticism to his advantage, that could really cost you, and his big playability might not be there yet until not this coming season, but the season after that, which is usually the case with players recovering from a torn ACL. So the ceiling's still tremendously high because it's Breece Hall, but be very careful because he is coming back from an injury in which players very rarely come back at 100% until 2 years after their major injury. So just keep these things in mind. All right, guys, those are my biggest pieces of advice for rounds 1 and 2. Hopefully this helps you crush rounds 1 and 2 of your draft. All right, guys, appreciate it. Catch you later.